This content is brought to you by Fisher Improvement Technologies Online, a learning platform that includes self-paced courses, knowledge sharing, and networking opportunities for safety, quality, and performance improvement professionals. Join now for free at online.improvewithfit.com.
This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Over 25 years helping leaders reducing errors and incidents. Here is your host of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, Rob Fisher.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. We've got a super treat today. It's somebody that I've known for a long time, Jeff Shockey. Jeff and I go way, way back from a time that we really weren't familiar with each other and each other's work to really helping each other out and understanding where industry was coming from on my side and where human performance could take people on somebody else's side. So let me just introduce Jeff Shockey. Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself and welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Rob. And it's been I guess it's been probably 15 to 17 years, depending on how good my memory is, that we've worked together.
I keep calling it 10, and then it just keeps increasing, but I think you're closer to 17 or 18 is probably the right answer.
Yeah, we keep trying not to add years onto our age, but I guess it doesn't work that way. But I'm a retired certified safety professional. I spent 40 years as a safety professional in industry. 35 of those years as a safety professional in a global mining, milling, manufacturing, aerospace organization that varied between 70 and 130,000 employees. When I retired in 2015 as the global safety director of that organization, I opened up a consultancy, and I've consulted for about 5 years, and I'm kind of working my way out of that over the course of the next year or so. But certainly, human and operational performance and fatal and serious injury prevention is something that you and I have had a lot of conversations about.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of that started back, I think it was 2003 at the InPro conference. I think it was in Syracuse, if I remember right.
Yep, it was.
And I think our organization was one of two non-nuclear or power organizations at that conference. And you and Sidney Decker were only the two speakers I remember. There were others, but those two, you and Sidney, had probably the most impact on myself and a colleague who was there with me. And I remember after that session, our plane was later in the evening, and we were sitting in the lounge or the bar having a adult beverage, and you walked in and we called you over and we started a conversation with you, really because, we had read some of Reason's work, and so that prompted us to come to this or that session. We heard you speak, and I think, as I look back on what differentiates people now that I've been a consultant too, is that there are professional consultants in any area, and then there are consulting practitioners. And I would put you and I in the latter category, that we really are consulting practitioners because we've done it. We know what it takes to do it. And so when we met you, that had an element of credibility with us, that we said our organization sees lots of professional consultants, but because we're in the safety and health area, we need somebody who has practical application tools. And that intrigued us. And of course, we had the conversation with you, and then Sidney Decker walked by and you called him over and introduced him to us. And he was kind of interested that, gee, what are these two industry people doing here? And we had that conversation. So that was really the start, other than just the preliminary work that we did reading Reason's book, of us going back and saying, we've been looking for something that would take us to the next level, not only in incident experience, because our incident experience in our company was benchmark, certainly benchmark in our industry, and benchmark across, the manufacturing sector.
Yeah, for the time, right?
But the stickler for us was the fact that we were really good at incident prevention, but we had not solved the problem of the low probability, high consequence event, the fatal or serious injury that takes us by surprise. It happens in plants that are one of our best performing plants safety wise. It happens in plants that have a really good incident rate. And so it said, those things aren't necessarily predictors, and there's something in the system, globally in our system and locally within the systems in the plants, that we're missing. We're missing something in the system that is allowing risks to creep in, or it's allowing us not to see something that's the undercurrent, the second story, as Sidney Decker would say. And so that's really where we got started. And of course, we kind of progressed from there. Looking back, I think early on, you and I met, and we met and talked, and we kicked things around, and we talked about the labor organizations that we had to deal with, and we did some language changes. We intentionally didn't want to confuse it with behavior-based safety, and so we did some things there. We changed what was in the norm, the culpability model. We talked about that with you, and it became the deviation potential model, which I think is used today now almost universally, thanks to you and conversations with us. And then, we did some things like that, and we were looking for a way to get started.
Yeah.
And that's really when we sat down with you and you outlined the deployment plan with us, and we customized it to make it fit for a non-nuclear environment. Nuclear had an advantage. A lot of that was regulatory. We had to sell it. And we had to make it in a way that could be delivered to people on the floor, but also could be delivered to senior leaders and get them engaged. Because without the senior leaders, as you know, it all starts with senior leadership. If you don't have them engaged in their support, you struggle.
Yeah, and I look back today on the amount of people that you impacted that have gone on to impact other organizations by your devotion to wanting to do things right. The sites that would tell you, hey, yeah, Jeff, this looks like a good thing, but we're going to do it our way. And you said, well, hold on. If you do it your way, you're going to be at fault if it goes wrong. And if you do it the way you're being told, somebody else is going to be at fault if it goes wrong. Why don't we try what people are telling us to do before we go off and do it our way, which is, almost said the name, before we do it our way, which is what we always do with things. And I remember those conversations in your office. Look, this is what we always do. We always take something, we make it ours, and then it becomes the our way, and we don't even think about the fact that maybe this has already been vetted and we only need to change it 20% instead of changing it 100%.
Right. And that's, we always struggle, even within the company, within business units, and even some locations of what I call the not invented here syndrome. And you and I had conversations with plants that we got kind of interested and initially started, and they wanted to jump to the tools. They wanted to jump to the tools and not build the foundation in the science and the getting the leadership involved. And we saw those locations struggle and have to come back and redo it again. I think the best example, though, is, having grown up in the organization, been there a long time, having relationships with certain leaders, having held a line position for at least 3 years of my career as an operations manager, plant manager, there were people that I knew within the organization that I could reach out to and get to read the reason book and start to change the language that leaders used. And slowly, and this is like from late 2003 through about 2005, start to educate my EHS professionals in what we're talking about and kind of get them prepared and build the foundation. and then a few select leaders who were business unit presidents who were willing to trust us at the corporate level enough to give it a try. And we picked people who had issues, who needed help, who had issues. The 2008 timeframe, the economy was bad. People were looking for a way to make a difference, particularly in safety, where money was tight in safety and all other areas. And we had two business unit leaders that actually took this on. And, rolling through 2008 into 2009 and 10, we looked at those results in 2010, and the results were not only in safety, but they were showing up in quality. And we had some really good success stories to tell.
In the millions.
Yes. And it's interesting because if you recall back when we went together to the head of human resources, the head of quality, and of course we were EHS, we said there are benefits in labor relations and human resources to this deployment. There are benefits in quality and benefits in EHS. And the human resources and quality people said, we just can't take on another new initiative. They had other things on their plate, but they said, we trust you guys in EHS and go ahead and try it.
Well, yeah. And
looking back now, in 2010, the results that we saw were not just safety, but they were, reduction in scrap and higher yields in plants that added to the millions, reduced customer concerns. We had two plants that were actually idled and shut down for about 2 years in that window of 2008 till we got through that recession, I guess, is what we'd call it now, or depression. When we came out of that and started those plants up, high risk time, we're starting plants up for the first time. You've got new to the job. And when I say new to the job, some of the people are actually new, and some of them are people that are returning from layoff, but they haven't been working for, 6, 8, 10, 12 months. And you have all the risks of starting up, not only from a quality standpoint, but from a cost standpoint, and then from an injury standpoint. And we applied the human performance concepts to that startup. And I think if I remember right, the number was like $30-some million less cost to start those two plants up than historically. Lowest incident rate we'd ever had for a series of plant startups, and no fatal or serious injuries. That was a win for us. The other plant had continued to operate, but because they were cost conscious, they were using human performance in the quality arena to drive yield. So they were piggybacking off the safety effort and driving an increased yield. And that got the attention of our CEO. If you remember, we had a presentation where we annual presentation of certain things that were kind of like EHS awards and performance awards and lean and so forth. And I remember the conversation after that was, hey, why aren't we doing this everywhere? And they wanted to actually basically mandate it. And I kept saying, wait a minute, there's value in the journey. There's value in the ownership by the people who deploy it. If we mandate it, they're not going to own it. It's going to be another corporate program. We can set a goal that they should start to learn about it and implement it at their pace, but we can't say you have to do this and here's the date by. Each plant and each business unit has to have their own journey, so they have ownership from the senior leaders in that business down to the people on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of put it in the vernacular of the essential leadership cycle, organizations make a mistake when they jump straight to clear roles and processes, telling people what to do. That doesn't generate trust. It doesn't generate diversity and inclusion or commitment. It certainly doesn't generate accountability. But what you were saying was, let's become kind of self and team aware of where we're at and what our needs are, and tie it to the mission, vision, goals, values of the smaller organizations so that it means something to them. Then they'll deploy, as opposed to saying, you better deploy or else, because they'll find all 9 ways from Sunday to fight you on that. So almost subconsciously, using that essential leadership cycle to drive the outcomes was brilliant because it was completely opposite of what people expected. I know the quality people, the HR people that we met with, I remember that meeting, kind of backing up to that meeting for two things. First, let me segue to an interesting story that I don't even know if you know what happened. I was nervous about that meeting in New York. I'd talked to my wife about how nerve-wracking it was going to be with that group of people when it was just, little old me at that point. And I remember we went downstairs and I asked you, hey, can you make sure my belt's through all of its loops on this suit? And you said, sure, I'll do that. But why? And I looked at you and said, listen, the last thing I want is an expert in human error standing in front of the president of a major corporation telling them they can reduce error probability and having missed a belt loop. And you just kept laughing over that. But out of that meeting, they actually mandated or dictated that all those groups should get together and create a coordinated plan. And the reason it went from that 2005 to almost 2008 was you could never get them all in the same room again. They kept saying, yeah, we see benefit, but we've got all this other crap going on, right?
Yeah, safety people were take that hill type of people in that organization. And so, the success of that certainly it had its roots in the safety and particularly the fatality prevention effort. I mean, we had a very strong value around human life and we valued it above all else in our values, and we tried to manage risk accordingly. So we were a frustrated organization when bad things happened because it was counter to a value that was near and dear to our heart. And I think what we've done, or what we did, was we took a serious look at what was happening in our organization, and we had quality incident investigations without a doubt. I remember Fred Manuel, at one point he came in and looked at our incident investigations from a quality standpoint, and he said he'd looked at probably 20 major corporations, and he rated us the highest of all the 20, and yet we hadn't solved the issue. And human performance gave us a window into other things. We had said long before we interacted with you that fatalities occur at the task level. And so when we got into human performance and you said, we've got to look at things in the context of this person on this task at this time, it was music to our ears. We had high-risk task of the day briefings in place, but the way we did those briefings going forward after human performance changed dramatically. It wasn't just reviewing the JSA or talking about the hazards we know about. It was also saying, who do we have on the crew? It was like putting the task in context. It wasn't just about the hazards. It just wasn't just about the work procedures, but who's on the crew? Who's been out? Who's new? Who's done this job before? Shouldn't we pair them? So those are the things that human performance brought to tools that we already had, but we learned not to reinvent the wheel, but to integrate human performance tools and concepts into our regular path of work.
And I really think that our partnership on that integration piece, that still lives with us here at FIT today. I mean, we have integration strategies, not just deployment. Deployment is one thing. You got to educate people, but you have to integrate the concepts, and then you've got to create sustainability so that when people do change out, especially the leaders change out, you don't go back to what that leader liked before. There's some continuum. And I think that 2008 to 2010, where the economy was performing poorly, but you had plants that were performing better than they'd ever performed, was a real eye-opener because they were performing in safety, effectiveness, efficiency, productivity, quality, all the different attributes that task-based system impacts.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about sustainability, and we could spend a lot of time, but, we started with the things on the floor, the tools and so forth that help people. But eventually we got into the system and the organization from the lessons that we learned. One of the ways that I'm proud that we made human performance sustainable in that organization was when we sat down with you and we said, here's our data. We've collected data from high-risk tasks of the day. We've collected some feedback on the types of error traps and so forth that we're seeing. And we actually integrated the right questions into our incident investigation process. And so when you have an event, it forces people to ask the second story questions because it leads them down a different analysis. We were very good. Like I said, we were out of 20 organizations that Fred had looked at, we were the tops. But we still hadn't fully grasped the value of some of those questions around human performance and getting the second story. We used to be an organization, I used to say, we were pretty good. We'll ask 4 whys and a whodunit.
And what did you do to them? Don't forget that one.
Yeah. And we had a hard time getting people past that at times in some plants. But then we worked on we worked with the deviation potential model and started to educate people on that. We revised our incident investigation to force them to ask those questions. And we trained them to ask the questions, and managers got better. And the minute managers get better, supervisors get better because they're watching what the boss, he or she, is doing and asking. And so, then the workforce won't accept anything if you don't ask the right questions, or they start to ask the right questions. And if you don't, and so you better get with it. If you're not asking the right questions, they'll ask them.
Right.
And safety people are there to coach. But that, to me, is part of the sustainability process. Building it into your incident investigation process, whether it's a quality incident or a safety incident, once you've got it started and in your DNA a little bit, you've got to build it into those things that are part of your normal work routine, whether it's a customer concern report or an incident investigation in safety and health, so that they're sustainable. And then the other piece, I think, is, your work instructions. And you and I have talked about that every time you do a pre-task brief of a high-risk task of the day, you may pick something up where you debrief afterwards, you pick something up that should go to a work instruction. And, every incident has a box in our particular process that said, should there be, as a result of this incident, should something be changed in the work instruction? Now, all that's after the fact still, but eventually, as the organization matures, people who are writing work instructions don't write them in the office. They go out and observe the task. They get people who are involved in the task to participate. And we had done that with job safety analysis for years, but we didn't do it with a human performance lens and a human performance advocate sitting there in the process.
Right.
And so, I would say anything where there's a design, where you're designing a new process or piece of equipment, anywhere where you have a work instruction or anywhere where you have some form of incident investigation or problem-solving event, human performance needs to be part of that in order to sustain the momentum once you've got it started.
Yeah, I agree. And you guys were also great at integrating at not just relying on the final barrier. So integrating the same type of questions that you would ask after something happens, or you had a near miss or a near hit or an incident, you pulled those up into the tailboards. You pulled those up into the daily management boards. You pulled up the recognition of the probable performance mode of people into the discussion of daily management. And that was a game changer in industries outside of military and nuclear and a couple of utilities, because those conversations with the workforce, with the people doing the work, became so rich, and they started identifying so many precursors. And your organization developed a strong trust with the leaders, because once the leaders heard about them, especially if they had fatality, serious injury potential, or high quality upset potential, the leaders would almost immediately do something about it. In other words, it wasn't just lip service from the leadership. They were actually making changes based on the pre-identification of problems.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I think the daily management system that we had in place, both at the crew, the department, and then the plant managers level was critical. And it's another example of where we took the tools and the concepts and we put it into something we had as part of the lean effort and to put it into the path of work, integrate it into that discussion. Look, human error is a symptom of trouble in the system. We know that. I think our managers very quickly learned that. And they, over time, stopped looking for where people went wrong. And they looked at, how the system either failed the individual or how the human system interface, what was the context of why the person did what they did and why did it make sense to them at the time. And that's not something that's natural to a lot of line leaders. It's definitely a learned behavior. And I saw that mature over the years. And I think certainly, that was a win for those folks, not only in safety, but in other issues, including quality and just general manufacturing output.
Yeah, I agree. And your employees, your workforce benefited from it, your customers benefited from it, and your leadership benefited from it. And in the end, in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, it's said a lot, but most people who've been through the human performance training and have been exposed to it, if you pull them off to the side, they'll tell you that they see all kinds of things outside of the workplace in their daily lives where they make mistakes or could have made mistakes, or they've intervened where mistakes could have been. And, I think of every once in a while, I catch myself as a pretty sophisticated, well-trained manager of risk, stop and catch myself when I'm working on a tractor that has a belt that's rubbing and I have a pair of gloves on. They can't quite work the wrench the way I want to. And I take the glove off and the nut on the bolt is hot enough to give me a second-degree burn because I don't put together that the belt must have been rubbing on the bolt. I'm focused on the belt. And I think to myself after that, there it was there and I didn't recognize it. And, in the context of the situation, the gloves were an impediment. And, how many times have we seen that at work with a maintenance person? This is kind of what goes through my mind. And we say, well, why did you take the gloves off? Because I couldn't work the wrench and properly with the gloves on.
Exactly. I will tell you still today, again, part of your, I so appreciate your steadfastness, even in some tough times, and your reach, because I will tell you that it has been less than a month since I got an email from someone that was directly impacted by what you were doing back then, that has carried this with them this entire time about something in their family, something in their new business, or something back where you were before, has significantly impacted their life. And, somebody's really got to believe in the values and believe in what you're doing to take time out of their day 10 years later to find somebody's email and email them about the impact that they made.
Yeah, that's a good testament, certainly, to the work that we did in human performance. And, that fatal serious injury prevention was something that you and I have worked on with Tom Kraus and ORC HSE networks and many others in other industries. And we were at the 2012 National Forum or Summit on Fatal Serious Injury Prevention. And that was really where we introduced some of your concepts to a lot of other companies. And certainly we've had a lot of opportunity between you and I both to speak to some of those folks. And I'd like to think that that's made an impact, and certainly it clearly did. In our organization, we hadn't worked fatal or serious injury. Well, we hadn't worked fatality free since pre-World War II. Employees and contractors. We had some years where we didn't have any employee fatalities, but we had contractor fatalities. And we even towards the last of my tenure in that organization had started to deploy at the request sometimes of our contractors, and sometimes at our urging for contractors who needed to do more, HP in our, what I'll call our embedded contractors, those contractors that were routine and repetitive in our operations support roles. And so in 2013, for the first time since pre-World War II, we were able to work an entire calendar year, almost 2 calendar years in the end, without a fatal injury. And I don't believe, without a doubt, that we would have ever gotten there without HP. And for that, I thank you. And thousands of employees are still here and still practicing, hopefully, those things that we taught them.
Well, and when I talk to the folks, the guys and gals from the old days, they still talk about that and talk about how even when you had the drastic reset, that, okay, it wasn't zero forever, but my golly, without thinking about it that way, and us putting a very strategic push around the identification of potentially fatal hazards, your serious injury rates and the other injury rates dropped as a result. And it wasn't because people were underreporting. It was because you were actually managing the risks and having the workforce help you manage the risks. And I remember a couple of years later, when something happened, I took it pretty damn personal, to the point that my wife had to kind of talk me down off a ledge because something happened, and I had gotten almost used to you guys not having those types of incidents. And I thought, what could I have done differently? How could I have made it so that individual and their family aren't suffering in this way? And I think that's where our values really matched up. And so she said, look, you can do what you can do, and you're going to try to improve, but you can't make a company do something.
Right. And risk is in reality a probability statement. It really is. Right. And so every risk has to be evaluated, and every undesirable event has to be evaluated in the context of what was happening at the time and what was going on. Organizations become distracted occasionally, just like individuals, and become vulnerable. But certainly, I think proof is in the pudding, so they say, when you find your way back. And I think good organizations that have sustainable safety programs, that have sustainable human performance programs, have sustainable leadership, and that's an important one, find their way back. And certainly the organization that I was part of found their way back from tough times, both in business and in the health and safety area. And certainly are to be admired for that.
I agree. I think one of the other things that really stabilized your ability to become sustainable were you had some people in union leadership positions that saw the way we were looking at things a little bit differently as a possibly better path to keeping their brothers and sisters safer, to providing them a better life and some better options.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I had many of my peers in other organizations say, how did you do this in a unionized facility? And first of all, it depends on the labor organization that you're working with. But we certainly had good relations, particularly in the health and safety area, and a lot of credibility with the international. And they had a lot of credibility in health and safety with us. That bought us some free space that it might not have happened without them giving us some freedom that they may not give an organization that hasn't proven they're serious about health and safety, and that an organization they trust enough to give them some leeway to try some things differently. And so that relationship certainly deserves a lot of credit. The leaders in those respective labor organizations in particular were supportive, sometimes against the current of what they were seeing in other companies. But I think our past relationship in health and safety, our past credibility with them in that area, that we were serious and that we wanted the best outcome, and so did they. And the collaboration and collaborative effort that we'd had probably over 20, 30 years with the Environmental Health and Safety Department of that organization, that labor organization, was essential to success. And they certainly deserve an equal amount of the credit because you learn best from the people who do the work. And so we had great support for advocates and trainers from within the ranks of the workforce, not just supervisors or engineers or safety people, so forth.
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously some initial skepticism, but once they had gone through the process, they really glommed on. It was theirs.
Yeah, they certainly took ownership and had pride of ownership, and certainly deserve credit for the helping make it successful, without a doubt.
Yeah, today we have tens of thousands of advocates around the globe. And that whole design of advocacy started with you guys.
Yeah, and I think that's, you and I've had this conversation a little bit. You can go from common to unique in certain aspects of the deployment, but it's really important, I think, to have common advocates, coaches, and trainers, and a common training package, and a common set of criteria of the types of people you're looking for that. And you certainly, your HP system definition and model, it may vary from one company to the next a little bit, but within a company, it needs to be common. It needs to be rooted in science. You may change some words. We changed words that we knew our culture would accept better than other words. You need to have, when you talk about sustainability, people don't get this on the first time 100%. So you need to have a way to have some initial and refresher training materials, and you need to have a consistent deployment path it doesn't matter where you are in the journey, but here's the journey. Here's the path to the journey. Some people may be in step 5 and some people may be in step 1. And this was back to our conversation. Don't force everybody to go from 0 to 60 by a certain date. The journey is important. Let them progress along the journey or along the deployment path at the rate that makes sense to them at the time. And if you do that, then it's going to sink in and it's going to take. So those are the things that are common. When you move further down into some of the tools and so forth, they get to be less common. But you've got to have concepts around critical steps as key drivers. The Swiss cheese model, certainly, stop work was a big part of our success. We got people to, have the discussion in our daily management system about the high-risk task of the day. And then we'd have the conversation about, okay, if that's the high-risk task, what are the air traps, in that task? What are the hazards? And, you've got a whole document that walks through some of the very same things that we outlined way back then. But one of the things we said is, what's the critical steps? And then when you reach that critical step, what's the stop work criteria? What's the criteria that says, okay, when this happens, we're going to stop work. And from the top of the organization down, we authorized stop work. And we had ways of reinforcing it. We used that stop coin, if you remember, concept. But we had ways of reinforcing and recognizing when people stopped work. And that was a culture shift right there. What? You mean we're going to stop production? And, and we made it very clear from the top of the organization, that's what we wanted you to do. And I think it was very successful, and it continued after I left. I know that. And certainly, each different business leader had different ways of recognizing people who, had taken stop work, and we publicized it and made it part of the culture, made it part of what's expected and accepted. And so, those are some of the other tools that I think really mattered.
Yeah, I agree. Again, that's all integrating the concepts into how the business does its work, as opposed to just relying on that final barrier to be good.
Yes. If I was talking with somebody who was going to implement human performance, whether it was quality or safety or whatever, I'd say, look, find out where the connections are to what you already do. Every location, every organization is on overload generally already on lots of stuff, especially right now, but even in the day-to-day. And so don't make human performance an island, just like I wouldn't suggest you make safety an island unto itself, because it's looked as an add-on. But if you integrate it into the way we do work, it becomes part of the climate, and climate influences culture, and then it becomes part of the culture of who you are. It's just the way we problem solve. It's just the way we think. And that leads to barrierless communication from the floor to the top, and, better listening from the top to the floor in lots of areas, not just safety, not just quality.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Jeff, listen, I really appreciate you being on. Is there anything that you want to close out with? Anything you think I should have asked you about that I didn't?
No, I can't think, Rob, I can't think of anything else that we haven't covered. We could talk for a month on this, and we'd lose your viewership in the process. But certainly it was a game changer in my career. It was certainly a game changer in the organization that I worked in. And I think it was a game changer for a lot of people in terms of their personal safety and health. So, I think if you're looking forward and you're an organization that's looking to improve, and you're serious about it, and you want to do what's right for your people and your organization, if you aren't looking at this at some point, you're missing a real opportunity by ignoring human performance.
We've just seen too many lives changed for the positive to ignore that. I think it's probably why I'm still doing what I'm doing.
Well, thanks for having me, and best of luck to the organization. And for those who listen, if they take the leap, I'd encourage them to spend some time with you, and that'll be an opportunity for them to learn even more.
Well, thanks for being on, Jeff. I really appreciate you, and I hope everyone learned something good from Jeff today. Join us again on our next cycle, Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. And again, this is your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher, saying intentional leadership starts with you.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest, and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.